Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and welcome back to the Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Unity. In this series, we're doing 10 videos at 10 minutes or less each, and we're going to make a simple platformer together. In our last video, we got our character moving, and while that's great and everything, it's a pretty boring platformer. So this time around, we're going to get our little guy jumping. That's where we're headed now. Let's get started. So in this series, we're using rigid body physics to get our player moving, which means we've got this rigid body 2D component. That's what we're going to have to give commands to if we're going to want to make our player jump. So let's head into the player controller that we created last time. Now the very first thing we'll do is create a public float so that we actually have a jump force that we can apply to our player. This is public, so we'll be able to test it in Unity and try out different values. Next, we can head down to our update method, and I'm just going to add a comment here to sort of separate out our movement logic from our new jumping logic. Now in our update method, in addition to constantly checking for a horizontal input, we're also going to do an if statement where we're going to check for another input. In this case, pressing down the button jump. Now just as a reminder, if we pop back into Unity, go to Edit, Project Settings, and then open up our Input Manager, we can check here that there's already a pre-made setting for jump. Currently it is bound to space, and you're welcome to change that if you want, but I just wanted to show you where we're getting that button from. Now then, whenever we press the jump button, we just want to give a command to our rigid body that it's going to get a new linear velocity. Here we're going to construct it at runtime, so we'll make it a new vector 2. And for the X, we're just going to tell our rigid body to continue to use whatever linear velocity it already has. This means that we'll still have control and fixed update to push left or right to move direction. That said, for our Y value, we just want to apply our jump force. Let's test that out. Now when we get into Unity, we can click on our player and just head down to our controller here, where make sure we have some speed if you left a 0 there, and then we'll give him some jump force. Let's try a value of about 10. And we get in the game that works pretty well, except that it's really floaty. So let's take a look at our player's rigid body and just give him a higher gravity scale, like say 3. Now the jump's feeling a lot better. We fall more quickly, and it's a pretty controlled little jump. Alright, now when you leave play mode, you'll have to reset any values that you changed, so I'm just going to put that gravity scale back. And now though, we've got one new problem. That is just that when we jump, if you continue to spam the jump button, you'll notice that you can jump forever. We need a way for our player to check if he's on the ground before jumping. Now let's begin by determining what actually is ground. If I click on one of my platforms here, I can go to Layer, and we're just going to add a new one. You can put this anywhere you want, but I'm just going to make a layer on, say, number 6 here called ground. I'm going to shift click all of my platforms and make sure that we put them on that ground layer. Now we can go back into our code. And first off, I'm actually just going to get rid of the start update as we're not going to be using it, and it'll kind of clog up our code here. Now we're going to add a new condition. In addition to needing to press down the jump button, we're also going to do another check to make sure that we also have to be grounded. Now isGrounded is not currently a method we have, so we're going to create that down below here. We'll make a void method called isGrounded and then give it some curly brackets, but in fact we don't want this to be a void method. We want it to return a true or false value depending on whether or not we're on the ground, so we'll make this a bool method. For now, we're just going to go with return true here, so it will think that it's always on the ground. And then if you come up top, we're just going to actually give our game a way to start checking for ground. So here we're going to make a public transform reference called ground check. This will represent the place where we look for ground. So in Unity, we'll just add an empty object onto our player. I'm going to call this ground check, and then I'm going to use my move tool to put this down by his feet. And our plan now is going to be to cast an invisible circle in the area around that ground check to see if it collides with anything belonging to the ground layer. Now, if we click on our player, we can just drag that ground check into that box, and he now knows where to look for ground. However, he doesn't yet know how close to ground he needs to be or what counts as a ground layer. So let's head into our bool method, and now we're going to return, and here we'll use the physics 2D library, and we're going to just cast an overlap circle, which, as I said before, is a sort of invisible trigger collider. It's going to be cast at our ground check position, and now we need to decide how large it is. So let's just use a ground check radius, which doesn't exist. So if we come up top now, we can create a public float or decimal value for that radius. Finally, this method needs to know what it's looking for, and so we're going to look for something on the ground layer. Again, we haven't created that yet, so we're going to make a public layer mask called ground layer. Now in Unity, we can tell our player controller what counts as ground. So let's put the ground layer we created in there, but you could also put other things like if you wanted to jump off of buildings or the heads of enemies, you could add them in here as well. Don't forget to make sure you have a value in your ground check radius, and then we're ready to give this a try. Now when I get in the game, I could spam click this as many times as I want, and we can only jump once. You'll notice a little problem. We can stick to walls by pressing sideways when we fall against them. Let's fix that next. So to get rid of that stickiness, we're just going to right click down in our assets folder. And first of all, let's create a new folder here, which we can call materials. We'll then right click again, go to create, and under 2D, we're going to pick physics material. I'm just going to call this non-stick. And then over on the side here, we're going to make sure that we set the friction value to 0. Now, if we go to our player, in his rigid body, you'll notice that we have this material box and we can just put non-stick in there. Now when we play the game, if we run and jump and then try to press against the side of a platform, we're just gonna fall because we no longer have that friction value. All right, that's working pretty great. Now it would sure be nice to improve this jump by being able to hold the button to press longer, and we're actually gonna do that coming up in this series. However, we've now got jump and movement and we're ready to move on to the next video. Hope to see you there. Until then, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.